books that are about this high because it's shaking when I do this. See?
Under here?
Yeah. This moves no matter what I do. Watch. See? It shakes. If you have books that are more stable. Okay, we're going live.
We're on.
Can't see any comments yet. Thank you. All right, do you see anybody comment? Can't tell for.
So these are live on Substack.
Okay.
And yeah, there's 74 people on here.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
I can't see whether. Yeah, just help me out there. Thanks. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us, Substack. Let us know where you're at just for a minute or so other people can join on. I see Glinda shared right there. Thank you. Good evening, Glinda. Thank you very much. Looks like somebody popping in from YouTube. And as you can see, Rye is across from you, acting silent because we're getting ready to play his video he's been working on for a couple days.
I'm appreciating the Clippy logo on somebody's profile.
Yeah, I don't know if they can hear you. Your mic's turned off.
No.
But let's just gonna give a little intro. Yeah, you should be live now, right? There you go.
Yeah, I just don't want to get.
I know. We'll turn that off. Hey guys, hello. Let's see. Watch from Edmonton, Alberta. Man, you guys are having a rough couple games, aren't you? Oh, you're giving me heart attacks up in Edmonton. McDavid, he's got to do everything by himself. When's Draisaitl going to get back? Halifax, home of hockey. Love that place. Hellington, Connecticut. Welcome. You know, Ryan's from Connecticut. Peterborough, Ontario. Peterborough Pete's, by the way. You're getting a lot of hockey trivia people for coming to an Epstein thing. Sorry about that. It's my thing. Okay, so I just want to give you guys an understanding of how many people we got on there now.
Well, that's Substack right there. And on your screen, you can
There we
see
go.
it here on Facebook.
Okay, so we got a couple hundred people on here now, and it'll probably grow as we go. I just want to give you guys an idea of what we're doing here. You've probably seen the first couple of podcasts. Rye is putting together stuff for us, and we talk about it. Like I think before I told you, we talk about things in the morning, talk about things at night. I go work on my stuff for my reels and working on the cabin business. Holly does her thing. Rye stays in his cave and puts together stuff for you guys. And we come together and talk about that. And we work on scripts, and then we do some rewriting, and then here we go. So what we're trying to do today and the next few days, I'm just going to give you an idea of what you're going to be able to see. Today we're doing, the last one we did was basically giving you an overview of the Epstein story to those people who don't follow it religiously, so that everybody can kind of get up to speed if they want to. And we don't have to keep going over things a million times for people who've never really kept up with it. I mean, it's really easy. The Epstein story is kind of one of those stories where there's so many different tentacles to it, so many different parts, that it's easy to lose track of what the story is about. The story is about, honestly, a million different things, but what we're focusing on in many respects is the sexual assault allegations by perpetrators on young girls. And what Ryan and I have committed to do is, one, help tell that story in a meaningful way with things that we learn, but also through the eyes of people who've already been telling it. That's where we are tonight, which I think is really useful to people, because some of the really great reporting that's been done on this started decades ago. And you guys probably wouldn't be, have purview of it unless we kind of reminded you. And we'd love to remind you who some of the really great players are who've been working on this stuff for decades as well, because those are the people you can have follow. And we'll advance the story in our ways, and they'll continue to advance the story in their way. And there's a lot of, actually, by the way, some of the people in this video tonight are not going to be, there's hundreds of people who've covered this story, hundreds. And there's no way we could possibly cover them all and make it timely and make it interesting for everybody. So we picked out what we think are sort of the highlights of how the story has moved and changed and how it's evolved. And there'll be more. And we actually, Ryan and I, look at a lot of those other people's content, especially the newer content, because those people are the ones breaking the story now, day to day. I will touch on a couple of those as well. But I think the most important thing to know is that After today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing some stories on the documents themselves, which we think are very interesting, showing some patterns in the documents. And I think as this story moves from, it's a sexual assault story, but it's becoming a cover-up story. I mean, it's already a cover-up story, but it's in a sense, it's a cover-up story that you're starting to see signs of the cover-up. And you can actually start pointing to signs of the cover-up through the documents and the way they're cataloging the documents and releasing the documents. So we'll start talking about that. We're not going to talk about that tonight. What we're going to talk about tonight is the media stuff. And Rye's prepared about a 10-minute long piece I'm going to ask you guys to sit through that kind of goes through it with his voiceover. And then we're going to go back and talk about, how we're doing this through the AI platform that helps us do things in timely, fast fashion to get you guys up to speed. But also, we'll talk you through on the media side, which is sort of my background. And you can ask questions about both things. You can ask the AI stuff to Rye all day long, and the research stuff, and the cataloging, the archiving stuff to him all day long. And you can ask me about the media stuff. And hopefully that'll give you a pretty good perspective on where things stand. Again, I always want to emphasize that some of the amazing reporting that's been done on this has been done by other people. I'm not breaking a lot of news today, none. But we are going down a road to where we're moving towards more of that. But we're really, our goal has been to get you up to speed and try to help you understand the story. So tonight, with that vein in mind, we're going to show you this little 10-minute piece. Stick with it. Rye's doing voiceovers. You know, he was a college educator himself. Was it fair to say, not professor, but you were a college educator, you taught classes, instructor, he was a college instructor. And of course, I was an assistant professor at Columbia University where I taught documentary filmmaking. So we're covered with the film, that side. Here we go. I'm going to play it for you. You're going to see us go away for a few minutes, and then we're going to come back. Okay. So I need to turn off one mic and then turn on the show here.
This episode is about the journalists who moved the Epstein story forward. The ones who got close, the ones who got blocked, and the ones who forced it back into public view after powerful people had every reason to keep it buried. Jeffrey Epstein lived in public. He entertained in public. He surrounded himself with famous people in public. That's part of what makes this story so maddening. The warning signs were there early. Most of the time they were ignored. Most of the time they were softened. Most of the time, when they were printed, they still failed to break through. That's the pattern we're tracing here. But there was some very impressive reporting going on early in the story. Long before Jean-Luc Brunel was widely discussed as part of Jeffrey Epstein's world, Diane Sawyer and producer Craig Pies reported on him for 60 Minutes in 1988. The segment focused on abuse allegations in the Paris modeling system, including claims involving Brunel. At the time, viewers would have understood it as a story about exploitation in fashion, a story about young women being chewed up by a glamorous machine that ran on money, access, and intimidation. But, in retrospect, it looks like one of the earliest major broadcast warnings about a figure who would later emerge as part of Epstein's network. Brunel died by suicide in 2022 while in French custody, where he was awaiting trial on rape charges. Documents released as part of the Epstein files indicated that, in 2016, Jean-Luc Brunel was in secret contact with lawyers for Epstein's victims about providing evidence to federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity. After Epstein learned Brunel was considering going to prosecutors, he contacted counsel about it, and Brunel never followed through. We start in October 2002 with Landon Thomas Jr. in New York Magazine. The title is Jeffrey Epstein, International Money Man of Mystery. That title tells you the framing right away. Epstein is being presented as intriguing, rich, secretive, unusual, socially connected. The article gives readers the version of Epstein that much of the elite media accepted for years. Former Dalton teacher, Bear Stearns alumnus, wealth manager to billionaires, owner of a private island and one of the biggest townhouses in Manhattan. And buried inside that profile is the Donald Trump quote that would later become infamous. Trump calls Epstein a terrific guy and says he likes women on the younger side. That line sat there in plain sight. The abuse was already happening. The profile didn't expose Epstein, it didn't break the story open, but it did preserve documentation of the atmosphere that protected him. 6 months later, Vicky Ward got closer. Her 2003 Vanity Fair article still appeared as a society and business profile focused on Epstein's wealth, his ties to Leslie Wexner, and the mystery around his rise. But years later, Ward said that during her reporting, she had uncovered abuse allegations from two of the victims, Annie and Maria Farmer, that never made it into the final published story. Annie was 16 when she said Epstein and Maxwell sexually abused her. Her sister Maria said that she was 26 when she was abused. Ward said Vanity Fair editor Graydon Carter called the women and their allegations too sensitive and told her, "He's sensitive about the young women," and they were cut. Graydon Carter has disputed parts of that account, so I'm not going to pretend that doesn't exist. But whatever happened exactly, the larger point holds. A major magazine got unusually close to the real story very early, and what reached print was narrower, safer, and much less damning than what was sitting nearby. In the history of Epstein coverage, this is one of the clearest, earliest near misses. By 2006, the frame had changed. Abby Goodnow at the New York Times was writing about something much uglier than the glossy mystery pieces that came before. The question now? Why it appeared that the system was protecting him. Her reporting laid out that Palm Beach police believed they had probable cause for much more serious charges than the one Epstein ultimately faced. Instead, State Attorney Barry Krischer took the unusual step of bringing the case to a grand jury. Palm Beach Police Chief Michael Reiter accused prosecutors of giving Epstein special treatment and asked Krischer to step aside. Even the Palm Beach Post editorial board went after the handling of the case and asked, in effect, whether the system had tilted toward a wealthy, well-connected, alleged predator and away from very young girls. This is an important moment in the history of the media around this case. The question had risen on the national level as to whether or not power was already bending the legal process around him. In July 2010, investigative journalist Conchita Sarnoff published the first piece in a series that should have broken the Epstein story wide open 8 years before it actually did. Working for the Daily Beast under its indomitable co-founder and editor-in-chief Tina Brown, Sarnoff revealed the existence of a 53-page draft federal indictment that could have sent Epstein to prison for 20 years. The document detailed how Epstein's lawyers fought to negotiate the charges to a single minor state charge and 13 months in a county jail with a 16-hour daily work release pass. She obtained an exclusive look at Palm Beach Police Chief Michael Reiter's 9-hour deposition in which he stated on the record that Epstein had received special treatment. A follow-up piece went inside the mechanics of the abuse itself. A third story reported that federal investigators were still looking at Epstein for child trafficking, a charge carrying up to 20 years. Epstein called Brown after the first piece. His lawyer sent threatening letters, and then, in a detail that belongs in a different kind of story, Epstein walked past security at the Daily Beast's Manhattan offices, sat down, uninvited, in Brown's chair, and waited for her to return from lunch. When she walked in, he pointed at her and said, "Just stop." She didn't. The series landed, and then it didn't. Pre-Me Too, pre-Julie Brown, unfortunately, the news cycle moved on. This is where the story becomes harder for the public to ignore. In March 2011, Sharon Churcher and Chelsea White published a story in the Daily Telegraph centered on another victim. Her name was Virginia Roberts Giuffre. The story began exploring the role of Prince Andrew's alleged role in Epstein's world. The article's language is tabloid brutal, but that's part of why it mattered. It forced a scandal that had lingered in legal filings and elite whispers into a form the broader public could actually see. Once there was a famous perpetrator who also happened to be a prince and the favored son of the Queen of England, and a concrete set of allegations tied to a recognizable face, the insulation started to crack. This is far from the first warning in the Epstein story. It is, however, one of the first moments the warning became impossible to keep tucked inside the usual velvet-roped facade. Investigative journalist Nick Bryant's contribution was a dump of raw social architecture. In 2015, he teamed up with Gawker editor John Cook and published Epstein's so-called Little Black Book, turning a notorious but mostly whispered about Rolodex into public evidence. This widened the visible map of Epstein's world, not claiming to prove that everyone in the book had committed a crime, but rather showing the scale of Epstein's access and the caliber of names in his orbit. Sometimes journalism moves a story forward not by writing the perfect narrative, but by putting hard primary material in public view and letting the network reveal itself. Julie K. Brown's work for the Miami Herald stands out maybe more than any other single reporter's. In a series of articles, she and the Herald built the case from the victims outward, exposing how federal prosecutors had cut Epstein a sweetheart non-prosecution deal. The deal kept victims in the dark and protected potential co-conspirators. The Miami Herald's own package says Brown tracked down more than 60 women who said they had been abused. The series did what earlier journalism had failed to do. It made the machinery of protection visible. This is the moment when the press stops merely glimpsing at the Epstein story and starts forcing it back into the national spotlight. Then, a local ABC affiliate in Florida did something impactful as well. In 2019, WPBF investigative reporter Terry Parker and her team obtained and aired police videos from the original Palm Beach investigation, interviews with some of the teenage victims who first accused Epstein in 2005 and 2006. These weren't summaries in a legal filing or cleaned-up excerpts filtered through years of spin. These were the girls' own words, describing the massages, the money, the recruitment, the way the whole conveyor belt worked. That footage hit hard. It pulled the case out of abstraction. It reminded people that the original investigation had not been weak. The evidence had been there. The girls had been there. The failure came later, when the system took something stark and real and managed to blunt it. By late 2019, the media itself had become part of the Epstein story. A leaked, hot mic video caught ABC anchor Amy Robach saying the network had interviewed Virginia Giuffre years earlier and never aired the story. ABC said the reporting did not meet editorial standards. Robach later softened some of what she'd said in private. But the leak still mattered, because it showed once again how close this story had come to daylight before a major institution decided it was too risky, too messy, or too legally exposed to run. The timing made the leak hit even harder. Ronan Farrow's New York Times best-selling book, Catch and Kill, had just come out. The public had already been reminded that media institutions can get very powerful people start making calls. Then the Robach tape lands, and suddenly the pattern doesn't feel theoretical anymore. It feels familiar. In 2019, Tara Palmieri reported alongside Virginia Giuffre as survivors took the fight for justice into their own hands, knocking on witnesses' doors with the persistent sense they were being watched. The FBI called a key witness at an uncanny moment while they were there. Her subsequent podcast, Broken, Jeffrey Epstein, was substantial original reporting built from those survivor relationships rather than retrospective commentary. After Giuffre's death in April 2025, Palmieri kept pressing. She was among the first to identify that the DOJ had been quietly redacting Trump's name from FOIA releases since summer 2025, and to warn publicly that the Epstein Files Transparency Act release would be slow-walked. The story had changed. It was now about whether the public was being shown the full story, and Palmieri was already there. Bloomberg's 2025 reporting belongs here because it was original document reporting from newly obtained source material. The series, The Network, was built from more than 18,000 messages from Epstein's personal Yahoo account. Bloomberg didn't just wave the emails around and ask readers to trust them. It published a separate methods piece explaining that the reporters used cryptographic analysis, metadata analysis, and corroboration with outside sources to test authenticity. And the result wasn't abstract. The reporting showed the support, advice, and crisis management Epstein received as investigators closed in. In a story full of recycled filings and familiar anecdotes, Bloomberg obtained something genuinely new, vetted it, and added it to the public record. Virginia Giuffre had been telling her story for years, in court filings and interviews and litigation. What she had never done was tell it in full, in her own words, without redactions or legal constraints or the filter of someone else's agenda. Over 4 years, journalist Amy Wallace worked with Giuffre to change that. Giuffre had been unequivocal. Whatever happened to her, she wanted the book published. When she died by supposed suicide in April 2025, Wallace made sure it was. The book became a #1 New York Times bestseller. Within days of its release in October 2025, Prince Andrew was stripped of his royal titles and honors. Whatever the legal system had failed to extract for years in accountability, the published record accomplished in weeks. The invisible man, as he is often referred to in the files, had been seen. Wallace also holds recorded conversations in which Giuffre named names that have not yet been made fully public. The testimony exists. The journalism preserved it. What happens next is a different question. By 2026, the scandal was no longer only about what the files contained. It was about whether the public was even seeing the full archive it had been promised. On February 18th, independent journalist Roger Sollenberger was the first to flag that DOJ records tied to a single accuser's case appeared to be missing from public view, including a manifest of witness statements that proved the FBI had interviewed her multiple times. Then, Stephen Fowler at NPR widened the frame. His reporting showed that this wasn't just a weird one-off missing document that wasn't surfacing in searches. The files that DOJ had released showed plainly that more than 50 pages were being withheld, which begs the question, what's in those missing pages? Once the archive itself becomes unstable, journalism is no longer just reading the record, it's auditing the integrity of that record. And finally, coming to the present, the groundbreaking journalism is no longer only about Epstein's crimes or even his network. It is, however, still driven first and foremost by the journalists and the public. It's expanded into coverage about the consistency of the archive itself. In early March 2026, after mounting pressure from journalists and the public, the DOJ quietly released about 1,000 additional pages of documents, after having claimed they'd released everything. Among these were 3 additional FBI interviews with a woman who alleged she was abused by Donald Trump as a child. Even after the promise of transparency, journalists still had to point out what was missing. But it worked. At least some of the withheld files were released. 16 of the pages released earlier this month were made public because the journalists and the public refused to give up. This is how we win. We follow the facts, we don't give up, we don't stop talking about it, and we don't stop looking. Now, because of the work of some incredible journalists, and I know I've left out loads in this presentation, we know that there were 53 pages missing regarding the FBI's investigation around the claims of this accuser. If you do the math out, that's 37 additional pages that are still being withheld by the Department of Justice, likely handwritten notes, a law enforcement report, and license records. Where are the missing 37 pages? Does the public have a right to see these? Will we ever get the chance? What do you think? Here's a graphic I created to explain exactly how, why, and where we knew that there were 53 missing pages, and how we know that there are still at least 37 missing pages about this victim. And a reminder, that's just one victim, one single case in more than 1,000 sexual assault victims. The table in the top left is from the document index of FBI info given to the Ghislaine Maxwell defense, things that were provided to her attorneys. This is, importantly, not a complete record of what may exist anywhere, but rather a record of what was given to them, things that thus definitely indeed exist. Among the 3 million documents released by DOJ in January was only one of the 4 interviews listed here. The first one, along with the 3 photographs in orange and the 5 pages of FBI intakes and reports in yellow. Each of these screenshots is from the bottom right of a document you can search up on DOJ's library or my website using the main EFTA number at the very bottom. One spot up from those, if you'll notice, there's a second EFTA number, this one with an underscore. This appears to have been generated during some sort of internal review process of the documents prior to release. However, they appear to be assigned sequentially, and thus the gaps in the numbering tell its own story. If the order listed in the manifest on the top left is indeed as it appears, the order in which these documents were assigned the secondary serial numbers, the ones with the underscores, then not only can we determine that the items from the manifest are missing, but we can determine precisely what serial numbers they would have been assigned in this internal review. From the end of the initial 302 interview, which ends in 15, We previously could not find any documents numbered 57716 up to 57768. At 57769, the 3 photographs started. However, when the additional documents were published on March 5th, some of this gap was filled in. We now have the final 3 interviews with this victim, and I've filled in those pages in this diagram at the bottom. We still do not, however, have the 3 sets of interview notes. We also don't know for sure that there weren't additional interview notes from the final victim interview. We do know that, at least, 3 sets of interview notes are missing, spanning 37 pages, and we're even quite confident on what serial numbers they should have.
Okay. You guys should be able to hear us by now. Yep. There you go. Let my fingers do the walking. So you guys, hopefully you got a chance to see that. And I think this is important for you guys to have that overview. The most important thing to me when thinking about it is 1988. How's that for a number? 1988 is when we really started getting a whiff of not Jeffrey Epstein, but the system that was being set up underneath Jeffrey Epstein with Jean-Luc Brunel. You know, he started this modeling agency, and all these little incidents started happening between him and Epstein. And if you look at the Epstein photos that are actually in the DOJ files, literally thousands of these photos, he's very prominent, right? He's in. I'll let Rye take care, but he's seen all these photos many times, and so have I. But Rye, you know, how prominent a figure he was he in those pictures?
So you can't throw a stone through the photos without finding Jean-Luc Brunel. I mean, they were clearly close friends.
Yeah, and not only that, like I'm sure that the emails tell a story, but the pictures really tell a story. It's them always partying, or him with his shirt off, and standing around, you know, in pool type attire, just about everywhere they are, and you know, and that leads to other questions that we'll deal with later. You know, we're going to do a thing on all the mysterious deaths surrounding the Epstein files. We're going to have one of those coming up in the next few days. We're also, as you know, you saw that very complicated chart that took a lot of time to sort of prepare that Rye put together. A lot of what you'll see on that chart, you know, at the bottom of that chart, if you guys go back and look at it when we put it online, and you'll be able to see that. You'll see this presentation both across all my platforms and on Rye's platform, on his Substack, and also on his webpage. You guys can go to. I'm losing all the web pages in my mind here. That's right. Epstein-data.com, where you'll be able to see this as well as all the documentation and these charts and so forth. You can go back over it, look at them. But you know, one of the other stories we'll be doing is we'll be looking at files that were duplicates and triplicates. And one agency looked like they got rid of certain things from the file, and the other agency got rid of other certain things from the file. But if you put the 2 files together, you see what they eliminated. And it's insane. It's insane, the stuff that they think they should be able to eliminate. You know, actions that were taken by courts, people's names that shouldn't have been left out, whole paragraphs of stuff that when you look at one document, it's blacked out, and then you go to the other and it's there. And you're like, I see why they blackened it out over here. And so we're going to be doing a whole thing on that, which we've been researching in the last few days. And, you know, the interesting thing about all these stories is, you know, the media organizations that were following this, you know, you look at the timing of some of this stuff. 1988. Now, Craig Pies, you guys heard us talk about him at the very first slide in 60 Minutes. I wasn't at 60 Minutes when this story came out. Diane Sawyer was gone before I got there. But Craig Pies and I know each other from Afghanistan. We stayed in the same hotel when we first got there and covered the war. And Craig was, you know, an award-winning investigative reporter for both the New York Times and the LA Times. And he's still around. Craig and I have sent notes back and forth to each other in pretty good regularity. And I've invited him at some point when he's comfortable to come on and talk about the Jean-Luc Brunel story, which he has such great interesting insight that he has. He's also one of these guys that's like doing his own thing. He's got a lot of stuff going on, and when he has time, he'll come on. I know he will. But the fact is that it started with that piece in a sense. And you think about it, 1988, such a long time ago. And then you have things like, you know, you go to 2003 for the Vanity Fair piece, right? 2003, that's 23 years ago. Vanity Fair started delving into this in just this tiniest sort of way, but enough to make people want to go, that's interesting. And then 2006 with the New York Times. 2006 New York Times. You know, when New York Times starts reporting on something, everybody usually follows. I mean, they are the benchmark, the old gray lady, for pursuing big stories. That's, 20 years ago. Think about that. Do you know how hard it is to keep a story under wraps for 20 years when the New York Times is on it? I think to me that screams like how sophisticated the network and the cabal was that were covering up these crimes that everybody could keep their mouth shut for so long and not get caught. Then you go to 2011, right? 15 years ago, we knew about Prince Andrew, because some great reporting done then. And it was just this past year and this year where it really started ramping up to where he's no longer Prince Andrew anymore. He's just Andrew, and still he's not going to jail as far as I can tell. He's just been stripped of his titles.
I think it's important to mention there that it was not the law that managed to bring that into the public. It was Virginia Giuffre herself.
That's right. Virginia Giuffre brought that into the public light, and through her telling her story, but also through her book. And now she's not with us anymore. And that there's all sorts of stories surrounding that, people claiming it was a suicide or family saying it wasn't. And, these things will obviously be talked about for a long time, and details will come out over time that will maybe give us more clarity on it. But, obviously she went through a lot. 2019 to me is the other big story when a local TV affiliate began running, stories showing these interviews with these young ladies. A local affiliate in Florida. Really, to me, when you think about big news, it's always, a lot of times it's broken by big news organizations, but sometimes I've worked at smaller newspapers before. I never worked at a local affiliate, but I worked, before I went to 60 Minutes, I went straight to 60 Minutes. But I did do some local reporting as a freelancer when I was in Afghanistan. They don't have budgets to follow these stories like this, but oftentimes they break stories and nobody gives them credit for it because somebody that's bigger, like a national network, will see the local affiliate because it is their affiliate, and they'll pick it up, and some national news reporter start reporting on it, and suddenly they're a hero. So I think it's important to state in 2019, this local affiliate was kicking ass on this story. And so, it's come from all angles. The Miami Herald reporting, and how many did we did some math on that the other day, how many stories she had done on it.
We were able to count at least 83, I believe. But that might not be a complete record of everything she published.
Right. That was Julie Brown.
Yes.
Yeah. Julie Brown has been a groundbreaking reporter on the story. We know for sure we've found 83 stories that she's done. We did a search for it and everything, like a pretty comprehensive search, not just like on your internet. Did we do it through Claude? I think we did.
No, we went to the main page, scrolled all the way down,
and counted,
and then removed duplicates. It should be about 83.
Right, which is a tremendous body of work on one story, if you guys can imagine how dogged you had to be just to keep this in the public light. And each time she broke a story, it was another little piece told. So when you think about reporters and, why is it coming to light? The only reason this is coming to light is because reporters over 40 years have continued to stay on this story. And it would not be where it is if it weren't for some of the great reporting we cited today. And by the way, there's a lot of really good reporting on this happening right now on Substack. Some people consider themselves reporters, and some people consider themselves just researchers. But there's a number of them, and some of them aren't being mentioned tonight. And I apologize for you guys. We couldn't do a comprehensive list. Everybody's done every story on this. There's literally thousands and thousands of people who've reported on it, and thousands of stories over 40 years. But those are the big ones. I'd just like to maybe give Ryan an opportunity to talk about how AI played a part in our just putting this thing together, and how useful it can be in understanding the story.
Sure. So most of you probably know the web interface for Claude or ChatGPT. It sort of becomes a Wikipedia for everything. You don't want to take it at its word necessarily, but treat it as a document to allow you to find other resources and articles that can help you understand whatever you're trying to understand. So in developing this presentation, getting all major stories on the Epstein case is rather a tall order. But the pattern emerged quite quickly that these were not your typical articles that were being written. These were actually events that moved the case itself forward. You can't hear me?
Should be able to hear it. Let's see.
Can you hear me now?
That would not be good.
Sometimes it's just one person.
Sometimes
okay.
it's like one person. Sorry, if you guys are all having problems hearing Rye, please let us know.
Yes, I'm seeing Ellie Leonard definitely deserves an honorable mention here. She's inspired a lot of people, me included, to get looking at this case.
Yeah.
As for AI, we were able to draft the narrative for this. I was able to run Claude through every single article. So of course, I'm reading and skimming myself as much as I can, checking on the individual facts from the narrative. But then, it just accelerates this whole process so much. So I'm used to throwing together a PowerPoint for my students or whatever when I was teaching. But getting a precise narrative that lays this down in exactly the way that it needs to and deserves to be told is something that might take a team of people. I mean, you can probably tell better than I know, Jeff, but at large news organizations that may take a whole team a week to put together. I'm able to do, hopefully you think, a pretty decent job in about 2 days.
Yeah, and I think it's probably it's important for people to understand that when Ryan and I talk about news gathering, we were having a discussion today in his cave, and I said to him, like, when I first started reporting, I was working at my college newspaper. Let's say you had dial-up phones, right, with like strings on them. You walk the wrong direction and wrapped around your neck. And if you had to get information, you had to go to the county courthouse. You had to go, if you had to look up a property document, you had to go down to the county courthouse. If you wanted to see something was happening in your government, you had to go to meetings firsthand, and maybe your local newspaper covered it, which now they do not do nearly as well because newspapers' budgets are shrinking and they're declining, covering a lot of those things that you normally would have had in the past when I was growing up as a newspaper journalist. And just everything was difficult. And I mean, just calling the county courthouse to ask if you could get your hands on a document, you might get hung up on. And then you call back and it goes straight to voicemail. If they had voicemail, sometimes they just take it off and you hear a busy signal. What we see now and I know that sounds ridiculous, but I'm 58 and it's a whole new world. And what we're able to see now is we can get answers at our fingertips, even preparing a story. Okay. We might have spent a week writing a script. Instead, we put through some questions that we had Grok answer it. It wrote out a loose script and outline, and then we went through it and rewrote stuff today that we wanted to make clearer or made to understand. And it is a tool. Oh, there's Holly in the background again. It is a tool that you can use to speed up the reporting process. Now, trust me, your newspapers aren't letting anybody write their scripts, and your television stations aren't letting anybody write their scripts. That's still a human thing, right? But it does help in when you're trying to find information, put things together, and make linkages between documents, and make linkages between people. It is an extremely fast thing. If you were we said the other day, if you were going to put together a team of people, let's just say you had one person that had the Epstein beat at a local newspaper, and DOJ released between 3 and 3.5 million documents, and for you to analyze them, it would take 5.6 or 5.7 years if you didn't sleep, if you didn't go to the bathroom, unless you took your computer with you, if you took if you ate at your table and you were up 24 hours a day without any sleep whatsoever, and you only spent 1 minute on each document, it would take 5.6 or 5.7 years. Imagine now being able to go into the databases that we have and say, we're looking at, can we see pictures, or can we have documents with the word, island in it? And within a matter of minutes, they would all pop up, and you could start cross-referencing things from those documents. And I know it sounds like, duh, we know that now with AI, but actually, until you've used this tool and understand the capability of it, to me, it's just, it's a game changer. And what it does is it puts DOJ on the defensive, because it shortens their stall game. you can't stall nearly as much as you could because people can actually go through the material. And with thousands of people in the United States going through this material at any given time, there's a chance that people can break little parts of the story. Whereas before it might have taken 30 years, now it might take a number of months or weeks. And that's a problem for them. That's a problem for them. So what are they doing? They're releasing less documents. You saw Pam Bondi last week saying, that's it. No more documents. We're all done with the document thing, right? Why? Because they know that they've released this big hunk of documents at the bottom to hopefully appease the public and then say there's exemptions for the other ones. And here's the exemptions that are covered under the law. And they're all in those exemptions. But as we're working on this stuff and using AI as a tool, AI is then able to see where there's gaps in those documents. And sometimes we can understand through those gaps that there's a reason that they shouldn't release, they should release these. To me, that's really interesting. Rye, I know I'm probably not saying any of this right, but
No, you are. Yeah, definitely the main points. Yeah, I mean, when they release, hopefully, if they release the remaining 3 million documents, 1.5 million, it's hard to tell, but there are significant gaps in the they're called date stamps, those serial numbers I was showing you on that last slide. There are significant gaps in several series of those, and if you sort of count all those together, there's about 1.5 million documents that appear to have been reviewed internally and then not published. And the DOJ said they had 6 million responsive pages initially before this big dump of the first 3 million pages. So depending on how you count it, we could be looking at an additional 1.5 to 3 million files that have not been made public.
yeah. And if there are any people that are, say, perpetrators, pedophiles, whatever you want to call them at this point, if they're in those files, where do you think they would be in the document dump? At the beginning or at the end when they're playing the long game to try to stall this out? Let's say it's the president. Just, throw him out there. We know that for sure. It's been widely reported that they spent $850,000 in overtime alone. That's not the hours that he spent. That's just the overtime hours, taking FBI agents off of investigations in New York to redact his name out of the files. That's what's been reported. And some of that stuff probably was other stuff that they redacted out of it, but we know they were working on redacting him. And there are some places in the files where you do see his name, but have we seen any incriminating stuff about him? Slowly, like the one case that Roger Sullenberger has helped break, and Stephen Fowler, NPR, those guys put together this scenario where you're starting to understand that the one FBI interview with this one victim who between the ages of 13 and 15, depending on which data you're listening to, that one case alone has many, many pages that were redacted out and won't be released. And we also found through their reporting that instead of one FBI interview, right, like, oh, we interviewed her, it wasn't anything to it, there were four. And notes associated with that, which Rye talked about in his presentation. So many pages from that. How many pages do we know there? You've reported it, but I want to go back over it one more time real quick.
Oh, so there were initially 53 missing pages that could be demonstrated as existing and not existing in the files we've been shown. 16 of those pages have since been released, the 3 FD302s, they're called, the victim interviews. And we can still tell then, 57 minus 16, we got 37 pages of FBI interview notes that certainly exist. They were provided to Maxwell's defense, but we don't have them, despite the DOJ being legally required to release those documents, sans the victim information.
And remember, that's one victim, okay? And imagine, as they suggest, there are as many as 1,000, possibly more, sexual assault victims in the Epstein case. And so if you think about the dozens and dozens of pages from one file, which is a very, very damning story at this point to the president, imagine how many other cases there are, and imagine how many other perpetrators there are. Again, across party lines, okay? Many of these people are rich, but not all rich people are Republicans. Sometimes you got rich Democrats. And so we're looking at this from the standpoint of, let's get to the story and let's get the accountability on this story. And the only way to do that is to keep open eyes and keep an open mind as to the fact that some of these people are going to be from the party you all love and some are going to be from the party you hate, right?
Regardless of which party you're in, that is true. It's true for both parties. Unfortunately or fortunately, we're having a bit of the system revealed to us, and it's not along the lines that they'd have us fight with each other.
Yeah, and there's a good thing in here I'd like you to comment. Some of the stuff I'd really love you to comment on, Rye. Like Jeff Nielsen said, what I found from the AI search, AI will search everything it has and put out essentially a summary. I only said official, which probably was not the best term to use, but it is the aggregate of what information that is out there from all sources available to be searched. Thanks. Here, let him talk to that level.
So when you're asking these AIs a question, you have to consider the scope of how much information they might have, they might need to see in order to answer your question properly. So they have what's called a context limit. So you can only show them whatever 250,000 words or tokens they're called. And so all of the reporting on the Epstein case, even on all the official information that's out there, far exceeds the context window of any major AI model that I know of. So I would suggest that you ask more targeted questions or broader overarching timelines. I find very useful. Give me a timeline of, well, all major coverage on the Epstein story, right? I saw another comment in there. Does the Virginia Roberts Giuffre's family believe she killed herself? You can put that into Google and you'll find out, no, they don't think she killed herself. Or you can put it into Claude and you'll get, all of the different reporting that has corroborated that.
I think it's interesting to say, somebody asked the question, sorry, I'm trying not to lose my screen by scrolling through this stuff, but there's little ads keep popping up when I'm trying to do this. How can the DOJ not release the rest? This was legally required for release. And I'll answer it a couple ways, and I'll let Rye answer it as well. There are exemptions in the law that allow for certain protections. One, obviously, is for the protections of victims' names, which they've done a shit job of protecting. I mean, we know for sure, Rye has a list of 34 victims that were not redacted, and that information was released. And Rye literally is going back and making sure that any files he releases, to the best of his understanding, have those redacted names in them. And I'll let you talk about that in a second, Rye. Secondly, there are files that may be considered national security reasons to block out certain things. I fucking hate that, because here's the thing. If it's national security, it's like a blanket statement for a lot of things, and it's really hard to win cases in court with FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, to get national security stuff unredacted. When you're talking about FOIA law, which is where some of this will go eventually, people will apply for those documents that we know exist now because of the numbers that are on the bottom of those documents. When they apply, maybe they said it's for national security, but when you go to court and try to argue that in court to have that turned over, you'll have to make an argument that file is more important, that the public see that file, than that information be protected. And that's the case in all things that are redacted. You have to, the FOIA law, Freedom of Information Act, it's supposed to, and has, in my past experience as a print reporter and a broadcast journalist filing a lot of FOIAs in my career, it's supposed to lean on the side of shedding light on things. So if it's a close call between, say, national security or the public's right to know, the public's right to know is supposed to win out. But that's sometimes a case for a judge to make. And that maybe the judge is a conservative judge, maybe the judge is a liberal judge, you never know. But it's a really difficult thing. There's other reasons that things are not released. Do you remember the other ones? There's 5, I think.
Yeah, so descriptions of death and abuse, images of those, victim privacy, national security, I believe ongoing litigation, something like that, ongoing cases.
Ongoing investigations, criminal investigations.
Which can be kind of the blanket tool then, because you can just say, oh, well, there's an investigation open into that.
That's right. And that's and how are we to prove otherwise? Because investigations that are being done by the DOJ, because they investigate so much of this stuff, apparently, all this time they do all these investigations and only fucking 2 people have been charged. How can they literally use that as an excuse? But trust me, they will. And it's going to be very difficult to pry that door open. So that's why you have lawyers. That's why big organizations like the New York Times have lawyers. That just an example that goes off of the Epstein case. The Pete Hegseth, when the New York Times reporters sued Pete Hegseth over this Pentagon press corps policy, saying it was unconstitutional and you couldn't prohibit reporters from doing their job simply because what the court determined was they just didn't like the reporting. And so you go to court, this policy was put in place, last October, somewhere around there, and we get a ruling on it in March. So how many months of really important reporting was lost? And the press didn't have access to those files, to those press conferences, to ask questions of the Secretary of Defense. Why are we going to war with Venezuela? Why can't we see this stuff up close with embeds? Why, all the stuff that you'd want to ask in a press briefing, you couldn't get answers from because he had his hand-picked people in there. And so months and then you talk about Iran and all the stuff happening in Iran. There's no accountability with those guys. And we lost months and months of that reporting because the people always say, remember J.D. Vance went over there to Europe and said, you're losing your First Amendment rights in this country. You're losing your right to free speech is what he said. And he insulted all of the European countries saying you're giving away your right to free speech. And then he comes over here and you come back to the United States and they're handpicking the White House press corps and they're handpicking the Pentagon press corps. Fucking hypocrites. I hate them. Anyways, so the point being is the lawyers are the ones who are going to adjudicate a lot of this stuff when it comes to the DOJ's files. And it takes a long, long time. Again, they're playing the long game. They do not want you to know this information before the midterms, and they do not want you to know this information before he leaves office. And he's probably just hoping that by the time this stuff comes out about him, he's not here anymore. That's probably what he's hoping. And everybody else underneath him, as far as I'm concerned, it points to a conspiracy. When you look at documents that are side by side, and one document is blacking out and the other gives you revelations on these files that would make your head spin, and we'll show some of that this week to you, it just screams of cover-up. Everybody knows it. And, to me, it seems like something that's very obvious. Right? You have any thoughts about?
I just think it's amazing how, they partially ran on release the files, and then it actually comes into their custody. It's their decision to release the files, and they do everything they possibly can to limit, delay. When they finally let them go, they don't give the the Vaughn index. There's ways that they're supposed to do this that make it less of just a dump to the public of 3 million pages of unindexed documents. There are procedures that they're supposed to follow. But I just say, now we have AI, release the other 3 million, and in a week we'll all know what the answers were. Especially
if they're not redacting, if they're leaving the names of these pedophiles and co-conspirators in the files for us to see, which the law fucking requires. If they leave that stuff in there, there'll be heads rolling. But see, that's the thing. Many of these cases are not prosecutable anymore. Some of them have statute of limitations. Some of them, under the previous agreement that happened with the Epstein's first conviction, there's stuff in there that helped protect some of those people. And now you're looking at stuff that maybe you can get some civil litigation in some of the states around the country that allow civil litigation for stuff that's this old. But again, accountability isn't always people going to jail. Sometimes it's their reputations shedding light what they've done.
Certainly. I mean, that's better than nothing. I think it would be nice for the victims. I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I imagine some form of closure would come from seeing actual criminal charges for the actual atrocities that these men committed against these women as children. But I see somebody asking, can we subpoena Andrew, meaning Prince Andrew? I don't think so. He's a foreign national. I don't think he can be compelled to testify in front of Congress. I think, again, though, perhaps public pressure might be something that actually makes movement here, but it would have to cross the pond.
Well, and that's the interesting part about this is the most movement on this thing in the last several months has been happening from foreign countries. When you see high-ranking officials in Norway, being arrested, when you see Prince Andrew is not just any old prince. He was Queen Elizabeth's favorite son. So, that's what a lot of reporting said. He was like her favorite. I mean, and they're stripping him of his titles, and he's not going to jail at this point, but he's certainly been taken down a couple notches and publicly humiliated. He's going to live out his life knowing that everybody knows about some of the things that he did. And that's not exactly, I mean, imagine the royal family. They get mad when somebody reports on the most minor of things that happen to them. They freak out. This is like not a minor thing. It's a major thing. And some of the mapping that Rye has been looking at, he looks every day at where people are looking around the world at his site, for instance. And we've seen, he does this thing. I never know what he's saying when he's
Oh, it's equal now. It's Singapore. I just saw today. Singapore and the U.S. have matched up. There were about 3,000 from China too.
Yeah, and actually, if he wants to know exactly what's being said in the reporting in Singapore, he can literally take the articles, drop them into Claude, have them translated, and read all the stuff that's being written about that Singapore story, right?
And so can you. It's super easy. You just literally ask in English. These AI tools really take away the barrier between the technologically proficient and the person with questions. You just literally have to ask the question.
And you can literally do it without typing it. You can literally do it with your voice. You can go into AI and give it a voice command and say, bring all the articles from Singapore about the Jeffrey Epstein case, put them in a list in front of me, and please translate them to English so I can read them. I mean, you know how long that would take reporters to do in the past?
It'll at least summarize for you in English. There can be legal issues with it reproducing the article in full. They have some guidelines and parameters to not just completely reproduce somebody's publication, but it'll summarize for you very, very easily.
There's a note in here on a Facebook comment from Lana Rondina Little. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, and I hope you don't hear the weird background. There's a dog behind me who's snoring at this point. Dixie is snoring. I don't think it's George, but anyways, it's her question about it says AI can be incredible, but it needs to be regulated. Now we're going to get a whole sort of Ryan and I got into a big discussion on that today about the possibilities of that because of the DoD, the Department of Defense / Department of War, and their desire to make AI companies that do contracts with them to allow them to have basically uninhibited access to where humans don't. In other words, self-controlled AI doing things like fighting wars across the world. There's technical terms for it. I'll let Ryan explain it, but we'll probably do something on that at some point.
Yeah, that's really maybe one day that technology can be trusted to be autonomous, to control autonomous weaponry without a human in the chain there. But certainly, I work with these things all day. I have for years now. Granted, not in developing weaponry, but I've seen it fail and still does sometimes in very simple circumstances. I would just take Anthropic at their word when they say that Claude is not ready for those capabilities. That was the objection, I think, to autonomous weaponry from Anthropic to DoD was just that, look, we don't know that we can do that safely yet. Not that we'd never be willing to do that, but it can't be trusted yet to do that. Not to mention the existential sort of sci-fi fears that people have had for years about giving autonomous control of a weapon to an artificial entity. Just that notwithstanding, we're not quite there yet in the technology to even give the gun over to the AI.
Yeah, I mean, it's you were talking about, you actually said today you'd be terrified of that process if they were to make autonomous weapon systems work. The ethical issues as well as the things that you might not understand or you miss if you give them all that control.
Yeah, there's been a lot of fears of what an AI system might try to do, and it can just completely innocuously attempt to gain more control. That could be electricity, computing power, money directly, because more control and more resources generally makes it better at accomplishing its goal, whatever that goal is. So if you're adding lethality to that toolbox, you have to be damn certain that the thing you're giving the keys to the castle has your best interests in mind.
Yeah. And now we have a question from Roseanne. She says, Rye, even if the files redact perpetrators' names, is it possible to use AI to rifle through the files and use dates, times, and other information to find out who they are?
Somewhat, but the AI can only do what the humans can do faster. It can't necessarily find a name that isn't there. And there are mathematical techniques you can use to sort of estimate the probability of a given name in a given spot, but that's not evidence, that's inference. What it can do certainly, and what I've been using it for, is to go through these files at breakneck speed. So when they do release additional documents, we can process those very quickly. But I would be wary of using it to attempt to unredact anything, again, because they're not infallible. These AI systems will attempt to answer any question that you give it, and it can make mistakes. So unfortunately, the best it can do is what you're suggesting there, use dates and times and corroborate information, much like a human journalist could do if given all the hours in the day.
Yeah, another, so, well, we're talking about the statute of limitations. Somebody had a question about that. I've actually pulled each state's statute of limitations for sexual assault and sexual abuse cases. The states all have different statute limitations as it comes to this, and some of them are improving on them as a result of these kinds of cases, and some are going backward. And you just have to look at your individual state to see if statute limitations is still the kinds of things in some of these cases that can still go forward. But I will say that the civil lawsuits is a much easier way to go. Many states have civil lawsuit exemptions to allow these kinds of cases to go forward, even though they're many years old. So just look at your own state's criminal cases if you're interested in finding that out. Let's see. Can redacted files be unredacted? I'll let you take that one, Ryan.
So yeah, I see someone saying, you can. So there are media stories and internet lore of documents that you could just copy paste. That the redaction layer was done of just sort of painting a black bar over the thing visually, and that the text layer still contained the actual unredacted text. I vaguely remember actually verifying that by hand at one point, very early, it was 6 weeks ago now. But the process that I use to extract the text sort of circumvents that. So I extract the text layer directly. So if there were such an error, which would be very embarrassing on DOJ's part, then my system wouldn't even have noticed that they tried to redact that section, and the text would be included.
Our buddy Eric Winchester, who, by the way, is a motorcycle guy who stayed up at our cabins before, who follows both Virginia Backcountry Cabins that Holly and I own, but also is one of the followers on Facebook, and I think even maybe Substack as well. Eric asks, can AI be used to associate certain names with phrases, words, or contexts?
Absolutely. And in fact, so you could do that in a number of different ways. You can do that in more of a statistical analysis type of way, co-occurrence of words in documents and things. But I haven't taken that fancy of an approach yet. What I've used is actually developing a code word registry. So if you go to my site, go to the reports and search code word, you'll see a whole document where I used Claude as sort of an investigative journalist to go through these files and start lining up details. It's able to confirm, I believe Ellie Leonard also wrote on this, that Andrew is known as the invisible man in the files, and it's able to trace that down to an email where he's mentioned. I checked that part by hand. Loads of other code words and nicknames for people. I believe there is both a Dr. Evil and a Mr. Evil in these files, if you would believe it. I suppose there's enough evil, you should believe it. But loads of other ones like that.
And we're actually chasing some of those code words, code names ourselves, and seeing the occurrences and where they stand, and try to bring some context to that. We haven't talked about a lot of that yet, but it's one of the things we're working on. Just our routine is to where we want to try to tell at least one really good podcast a week where we try to introduce you to some of these concepts and people and places, and walk you through how this case is evolving. And then we're going to do some little bit of, I think probably this week, we're probably going to do the document comparisons, side-by-side comparisons. It's not like we're the only ones doing that. There's a lot of people out there doing this stuff. But we have an audience that we can show this to that will give you an understanding of how just insanely corrupt this is. I mean, you can see it side by side, right?
There's no possible explanation for those redactions under the EFTA. And what's more embarrassing is that they didn't even properly cover up whatever they were trying to cover up. You know, they unredact things in one letter, and there's about 4 copies throughout the whole corpus, the whole set of files. And between the various copies, you can make out the entire letter.
Yeah, it's really kind of crazy. All right, we're at probably right now. How long are we into this?
Hour 5.
Hour 5. We're going to take 2 more questions, then we're going to let you guys go for the night. And then just to remind you, if you go over on both our Substack pages, you can join onto there with unpaid subscriptions, but also paid ones that helps us do the work. Mine is, what is mine? From the Writer's Cabin on Substack. I'm losing my mind. And Rye, you want to give me yours?
Sure, I'm Document Zero with Rye Howard Stone on Substack. And then, as always, epstein-data.com if you want to dig into these stories yourself.
Yeah, I always talk to people about how this helps me feed my dogs. But, you know, we have Rye's dog walking around here, 16-year-old dog. And my dog apparently keeps eating his dog's food every day because my dog's a scavenger. And his dog's 16 years old and, you know, can barely stick up for himself. So, you know, if you get a subscription, he'll be able to afford all the extra food that he has to buy because my dog eats it all. But anyways, there's that. And again, his website is just an incredible resource. You just go look at it and look at some of the stuff they're able to pull up. And even if you're, you know, just looking at some, you know, just go peruse it and see that really incredible list that he's put together that'll help you understand these files. And don't be scared to just tinker around in it. You're not going to hurt it. Go in there and look at stuff, pull some things up and see what you can see. These are our government records. When the government doesn't release stuff to us, you know, they're like, well, you know, you can't have this. No, we fucking own it. We own the government's records. We're taxpayers. So when they're supposed to release stuff, they're supposed to. So don't be scared to look at it. You're not going to hurt it. It lives on the government website. He links to it through his page, and you can open them right up and you can tinker around really with Claude on the page and ask it questions and ask it to correlate stuff. It'll find things for you. You know, his idea is that this is a great research tool that he's building. Essentially, this, you know, this architecture that gets you to the DOJ site, and it can help journalists and researchers, but it can also help everyday people to try to understand this. You got some time in your hands. You don't want to watch some dumbass show on TV. You know, go look at some of this stuff. It's really important, especially as we get closer to these midterms, these elections. We need to know more about the people who are committing these crimes. Is there any more we had here? Holly's writing them down for me because I can't keep track of every page we're on.
Yes, I was asking to post links to the websites and platforms.
Yeah,
we can put those up.
We can put those up. We'll put them up on our. We'll put those up on our Substack in a message to you. I'll put all the links up on my Substack at From the Writer's Cabin, and you'll be able to take a look at his page through that. And he'll also probably put them up on his Substack as well, so it's redundant. There's another question.
Repeat his Substack.
Oh, yeah, we keep repeating it. Document Zero.
With Rye Howard.
Yeah, with Rye Howard. Yeah, with Rye Howard Stone. Go look it up, and it's Rye Howard Stone.
Right.
Yeah, so it's hyphenated, in other words. Next question. Wouldn't AI be susceptible to misuse with input by unethical bad actors? Fucking right. Rye, you want to talk about that?
Oh, yeah. So that's why I find the work of Anthropic so heartening. They actually have what's called a soul document. They call it that. So I don't know if I have the best analogy, but you know, imagine that you have somebody sort of sitting there and you have to reread this thing 500 times or something before they, you know, send you out into the world. So after Claude is trained, it appears there's some sort of document that's used either in that training process or after. They don't tell us exactly, that you can actually get Claude to reproduce, which means it's part of the training weights. It's not like a prompt that they feed before the conversation. And that is an extensive document that goes into all of the different ethical guidelines that they want Claude to have and imbue. You know, you can certainly derail even those efforts with, I think somebody was alluding to prompt injection, you know, giving it an untoward assignment. But the work of institutions like Anthropic reduce some of that harm or mitigate some of those risks. But certainly AI can be used for bad just as much as I would argue it can be used for good.
I'm seeing another question on here. Jeff, any idea if traditional investigative reporters are trying to find people who redacted the files that are willing to talk anonymously? I mean, if it were me, I'm not talking to a lot of people on the Epstein files that are traditional reporters, the Post or the Times or anything like that. But if it were me reporting on this story all the time, yeah, I'd be contacting as many people as I could to see if they talk to me. But I think the other thing you need to remember is that there are a lot of people out here who are victims who are putting themselves out there publicly. If you go look at the steps, the Capitol steps, when Thomas Massey and Kunar are out there talking, and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert are out there. I can't believe I'm actually praising those two ladies. But nonetheless, they're out there fighting for women's rights in this case. And I'm not going to say a negative word about them when it comes to that policy. I think they were really helpful because it made it allowable for other Republicans to take a position on this. You know, when the Trump administration's shouting down those people, they were literally being called into the Oval Office and threatened. And some of the projects in their districts, by the way, Lauren Boebert's projects have been shut down by the president because she took a political stance that this was right to release this stuff. So I don't know if she's just saying, I think she's an idiot, frankly. But nonetheless, in this particular case, she took a very tough political stance that very well could end up in her political career being over. And, you know, you can see Marjorie Taylor Greene was really pressured out of her job because she no longer had the ear of the president anymore because she took a political stance on sexual assault. So, so my point is that, you know, traditional investigative reporters are trying to find some of these women who are in the background of those. Definitely, they were probably there, and they've made a decision that it's okay for them to be known. In many cases, they were willing to talk. And I think that probably smart investigative reporters will be contacting some of those people and asking them to tell their stories more often, more frequently. Or maybe they want this stuff to go take its own course. It's hard to say. There's probably other Virginia Giuffres out there who want people to know what happened. But it's a personal choice. Something like sexual assault's a very personal choice. It affects you. The internet is forever. So, yeah.
Many of the victims have come forward and talked to press. If you go to my website, there's a button. I think it's like the second one down now. Hear from the victims. I embed, I think it's 19 interviews that I could find. If you know of another victim that's not represented on that page who has been interviewed publicly, please send me that information and I'll have them. Yeah. I'm just going to take a couple more real quick since we're on here. Yeah, Jeff Nielsen echoing what I said. Denny Grapp, a friend of mine from a military project a long time ago. She was helping do all the budget for that. What did she say? I'm not depending on most of Congress, female or otherwise. I appreciate it. Denny is as much of a skeptic of the system as I am. And yeah, I think she's right to do so because we've obviously seen this. They've passed the law and nobody's paying attention to it. So we're past the point where we're at the law and order presidency because they're clearly not obeying the law. So anyways, okay, guys, we're gonna cut it off now. We've been well over an hour. We'll see you again later this week with another Epstein update. We've got some things that we literally already have done, but we're gonna release them. You know, we have time to do an Epstein file, then we do maybe a story of mine or two on what's going on in places like Iran and around the world, and then we'll do another one. And in the meantime, Rye's gonna be kicking ass in his cave, doing more stuff. And every now and then I'm gonna go in and make him open the windows and make sure my dogs aren't eating his food. So thanks for everybody joining in tonight from the writer's cabin, actually in the main lodge, because you know we're trying to. Ryan and I are actually sitting across from each other, and we'll see you guys. Take care. Have a great Monday night, and we'll see you later on this week. Thanks for coming.